Welcome back to another Reading and Correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and I, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. And if you are looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 93 of Stepping Wild. Tibs didn't bother with the gate. Up the city wall, nearly running into a guard there, and in the air on the other side before they could react. Their hooded lantern, barely piercing the heavy rain, caused darkness. He used the same to control his fall, then continued running. A few hours later, the storm had become light rain, and the darkness was that of the night. By the morning, there was no more rain, and Tibbs set out to find the smuggler's trail. The map had the Wolf's Head Trail more sunrise ward than the deer, with a few landmarks to guide him. Even with them, he didn't know how anyone without an element would have found it. It took him 3 days of wandering the area until he sensed the worked stone under so much dead leaves stepping on top of it didn't reveal its existence. He oriented himself and brought in his sense. He gained enough definition to make out the next one when he brought it in by half, and headed to it. Headed in that direction. He oriented himself again, sensed the next one, and continued on. It used focusing on finding the first marker to avoid thinking about what had happened to end his fight with Alistair, but now, as he made camp well away from the trail, he needed to figure it out. He channeled water, and his core reserve turned its sharp blue. He pulled and pushed the essence around him, and it moved as he willed it, as it always did. He let go and channeled fire. Fire in his core reserve became its orange-red. The essence of the campfire also moved as he willed it. Not letting it go as he channeled water proved harder than he expected. It had seemed effortless when it happened during the fight to cause the explosion. Now he kept letting go of one before channeling the other. For so long he had to let go of an element before channeling the next one that it had become reflex. When he finally managed it, the explosion he readied himself for didn't happen. The essence didn't escape or leak out of him. Other than the two colors moving within its core reserve, they behaved as they should. He released each in one hand, and nothing unusual happened, other than he now willed two elements to move. Even when he brought them together, the expected explosion didn't happen. The essence floated together without mixing. How had the explosion happened then? Why weren't they igniting? What had he done differently? That was simple. He'd been releasing the essence when he transitioned from one element to the other. That was also hard to cause, and by the time he managed it, he'd forgotten to prepare himself, and the explosion sent him through enough trees. Getting the fever essence together to heal himself proved a challenge in itself. The clearing he created with the little essence he'd used was 12 paces across. So, how could he do this? Nothing had changed before the fight against Alistair or during. His old teacher had reacted before the explosion, so Tibs made a mirror from water and watched his blue eyes as he channeled fire as well. Blue and orange moved within his irises. That was bad. Alistair couldn't dismiss this as a trick of the light. He'd tell the guild and they would search for him even harder. He'd also tell them he'd beaten the brand, so Tibs wouldn't be able to rely on being dismissed as an ordinary runner if he tried to join a guild-controlled dungeon. His only advantage was that Alistair didn't know he could let go of the element entirely and appear to be one of the normal folks. But that didn't explain how it had happened. Nothing like it ever happened, so there wouldn't be books to explain. No, something similar had happened before to him. He discovered he could channel this element in the middle of a fight. Jekyll had noticed before Tibbs' eyes. Before Tibbs Notice before Tibbs's eyes had turned the I noticed before Tibbs his eyes had turned orange red of fire as he used it in the fight when his eyes had remained brown before. Afterward, he'd noticed the score reserve had changed colors to reflect how he channeled the element. To reflect how he channeled? To reflect the channeled element. Instead of pulling essence from the reserve in his bracers. Oh, I know what the how. Okay, yeah, doesn't need it. Fire had pushed his emotion so far he hadn't noticed any of that during the fighting. His rage and the need to use it to destroy his enemies had been all there was. That had happened because Tibbs had had the last of the audiences Water had tasked him with. She hadn't told him what would happen, so he hadn't known to pay attention for any changes. Just as he hadn't known to pay attention now. Only he hadn't accomplished anything special. Was this something he'd been able to do all the way back then and simply hadn't realized? It couldn't be. He had trained himself to let go of an element before channeling another as part of figuring out how it worked. If he could channel two, it would have happened. And it hadn't happened when he used the explosion against them. If he could, it would have happened as it had against Alistair. So, what had changed? He chuckled. He'd grown older, became better trained, read more, become learned, had more audiences. Were they the reason? But Water hadn't told him to seek more audiences. She said it was his choice how far he went, what he gained. Didn't that imply there was something to be gained? Was this it? Then why now? He'd become able to channel the element because Water told him which of them to have audiences with. The rest of the 8 core element: corruption, light, darkness, and purity. It was because he'd gained the 8 core element that something had changed, not before. Only that wasn't true. After his audience with fire, he'd gained control of life essence. At the time, he thought it was because he'd gotten the core element since Alistair and what was the guild leader's name? They talk about there being only 4 elements that were core: water, earth, air, and fire. They told him they were the only elements that were part of everything. Except it wasn't true, and they knew it. She just hadn't cared for the other elements, even if hers wasn't one of them. Crystal had been her element. She'd pushed him towards those 4, had said something about the others being too hard to use. Water, earth, air, fire, then darkness, purity, corruption, and light, and now wood, fever, metal, and lightning. Something had changed after his first 4 audiences, changed again for later. Fever had been the last of the next 4. And now he discovered something had changed again. Did that mean there would be another change after 4 more audiences? How many elements were left? Void, mind, crystal, potentia, force, binding, dream, and stagnation. 8. 2 sets of 4. Was that confirmation? He wouldn't know until he had 4 more audiences, and unless he found a reliable method to achieve them, he had no idea how long that would take. What did it mean that he could channel 2 elements, other than he'd have to avoid doing so unless he fought with his eyes closed? He replaced water with earth. He formed the etching for the fire blast, but didn't push essence into it. Besides, next to it, he reproduced. Actually, I don't need reproduce, basically implies. He reproduced it with earth essence matching the Arcanus. It wouldn't work. He'd tried it before, had tried all the etchings he knew with all the elements he had, and few translated directly. Once he pushed earth essence into it, the etching would crumble. Earth couldn't do what fire did, so it needed a different etching to produce an effect that approached the fire one. But what happened if the etching made of earth essence then received fire essence to power it? Etching could be made of multiple essences. It was the core of how sorcerers etched and what made them powerful. They trained to become sensitive to all the elements and could manipulate them. Some books contain diagrams for such etchings, and Don had showed him others, but they hadn't explained what would happen. With Don, the etching had just been an example for something Tibs didn't recall, and the books that contained them only had scholars' opinions, since sorcerers didn't share their knowledge. He pushed fire through the etching and nothing happened. It moved within it, but it wouldn't take to it. He let it dissipate and put earth essence into the fire etching. The reaction was immediate. It took the essence, and what blasted out was a mix of them. The fire of the etching infused with earth essence, and a burning mud stuck the trees it impacted, letting the fire spread quickly. By the time he overcame the surprise and pulled the fire back, a dozen trees were blackened. What had seemed like mud had hardened into stone embedded into the trunks. Deadly against an attacker, but the stone left behind would mark the attack as essence work unless he took the time to undo it. He smiled. But what if he used an essence that was the same as the body it was used against? He remade the etching with fire, then channeled fever instead of earth. He gasped at the rising heat broth. He pulled at the confining clothing, burning them when they resisted, without care for the pain he felt. Feeling anything, everything was food? Feeling anything, everything was food. Was needed, was strong, was needed. When all he were his bracers, he screamed with joy, anger, want, pleasure. It wasn't enough. He needed more. He cast his sense for fever through the forest. Then he went stalking for more to feel. And that concludes chapter 93 of Stepping Wild. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter will be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read this story, it is available for free on Royal Road. If you want to read ahead of that by about 20 chapters and support me in the process, that is on Ream Story. And if you are looking to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. Links are in the notes, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.